talking a little bit, and what I'm going to do, there's a bunch of slides that put together by other people. My section is the Diagnostic Bacteriology Laboratory, so I'll probably be talking more about CEM and equine piroplasmosis, some of the TB. When we get in the influenza slides at the end, I'll try to get through them, but that's not my area of expertise. National Centers for Animal Health, this is a new name and a new term that we're using to refer to our remodernized center in Ames. This is, it still contains the Center for Veterinary Biologics, the National Animal Disease Center, which is ARS, and of course the National Veterinary Services Laboratories. But when we combined all of our facilities, all of our support groups, the engineering groups, the animal welfare or care groups, and so we're referring to that site as kind of like NCAH, kind of like NIH, National Institutes of Health. So we have separate units, but this is what we are. And you'll be seeing this name hopefully more often. We've just moved into our new facility, and one thing I've been doing for the past 10 years, in addition to being the director of Diagnostic Bacteriology Lab, I've also been the APHIS program rep for all of the construction. So this is our new, what we call a consolidated laboratory facility that we just finished moving into in September, with the exception of our select agent groups, which we haven't been able to move over until we actually get inspected and approved by CDC. But it's a nice facility. It's 550,000 square feet, a little over $200 million in construction cost. Some of the other parts of the modernization project, this is the phase 1 laboratory. This is actually where my office is, and part of the bacteriology diagnostic lab is also Art Davis and pathobiology is located in that building. It was built first with some money in a Defense Department grant right after 9/11 and the anthrax scare, because we were doing anthrax on strip mall in downtown Ames, and they decided they wanted to get us behind some more secure lines as fast as we could. And despite what they say about the Ames strain of anthrax, it never was in Iowa, never was in Ames. It came from Texas, and they used an old shipping box of ours with the Ames return address on it. That's how I got named that. The high containment large animal facility, this is a BSL-3 ag facility that was completed in February 2007. It's actually divided into two wings, an APHIS and an ARS side. On the ARS side, they're using it mainly for brucellosis work in bison and some of the TB work they're doing with white-tailed deer and transmission studies. We use it for emerging diseases on our side. So any of the new diseases we put in, the avian influenzas and whatever, where we have to have with the animal room itself is the biocontainment barrier. That's the building we use for that. The walls are 14 inches thick and pressure decay tested. Then we developed a low containment animal facility. This is just for our everyday run-of-the-mill endemic diseases that we have, whether it be Johne's disease or whatever. Still have some construction left to do. First and Second Street is our old animal barns. They'll be torn down. Hopefully we'll get them down and out of there by end of November, because we have to put roads in and they quit making asphalt at the middle of November. And then the old NADC building up here will have to be torn down. As far as the topics, we'll talk about diseases. The list that I have slides on today, of course, I'll probably talk more about contagious equine metritis and equine piroplasmosis than the others. And we're talking about CEM when I got Peter Timoney in the room, so I hope I don't. He's the expert. But causative agents: Taylorella equigenitalis, highly contagious venereal disease of horses. Mares, you get short-term infertility, cervicitis, vaginal discharge. Stallions are really not infected; they're just carriers. They mechanically transmit it from one animal to the other. First described in 1977 and eradicated from the U.S. in 79. We've, through the years, through importation of horses through the import centers, we've picked up 36 positives that came into the United States. Those have been treated at the quarantine centers. and then released from quarantine. There was an incident with some Lipizzaner stallions in 2006 in Wisconsin, and that was also quickly cleared up. And currently we're working on the 2009 trace-outs for a horse that was originally discovered in Kentucky. As far as the regulations for CEM, horses that are imported are tested for CEM with some exceptions. They might come in for events or coming from certain countries that are known to be free of CEM. Some countries also require us to test for CEM prior to exporting. That's how that last horse was found. It was on testing of semen prior to export. All diagnostic tests done at NVSL or APHIS-approved laboratories. There are currently 15 approved laboratories in the U.S. and 4 more waiting for approval. And any suspected cases must be confirmed at the NVSL. Okay, the culturing is the gold standard for CEM. The mare stallions and test mares. Suspected positives, we test by FA agglutination, PCR, and 16S ribosomal DNA. Complement fixation test in mares, it's not that good. It's with complement fixation test and equines, they have a tendency not to have a long duration of antibody. This is definitely the case with CEM. It's a very good test for test mares that if they become positive 14, 21 days after being bred, it's a very, very good tool there, but long-term use to look at a mare to see if it had been infected, it's really not. We're looking at developing a competitive ELISA, hope it'll have a longer sensitivity, and of course in the stallion you get no antibody response at all. So also looking at PCR for clinical samples and looking at semen. But again, it's good to confirm CEM, but it's hard to prove a negative with a PCR. We did develop a pulse field gel electrophoresis protocol using selected enzymes that Matt Erdman, who works in the bacterial identification laboratory, developed. With that, we were able to show that all of the isolates from the 2009 outbreak were identical, so they're all epidemiologically linked. It was no different. They were all different from our library of over 150 other isolates, with the exception of one. That we had one isolate that came in about 10 years ago into one of the diagnostic centers that had 95% similarity. That was on a forage stallion coming out of Denmark. That horse was treated and released from quarantine. There's no epidemiological link to that horse and to the outbreak. It's just that we feel that there are probably similar strains coming in from maybe the Denmark area. This is the slide showing the epidemiological links that we have. This in 2009, this is what we're seeing. These are all AI, artificial insemination stations, where there was a cross-infectivity among the stallions through poor cleaning techniques. And by tracing back the stallions that became infected and going back to where they were in the previous breeding seasons, we can figure out when they become the larger arrows are the positive horses, the horses that we knew were positive at that time, and we can get an epidemiological leak and trying to find out where these horses that were presumed negative coming into that collection station then became positive and spread out. Talk a little bit about eastern equine encephalitis, seasonal concurrence in temperate climates. Usually see it in southeastern U.S., occasionally see it in Canada. Incubation period 5 to 14 days, clinical signs, fever, blindness, weakness, depression. Of eastern, western, Venezuelan, and West Nile, eastern has the highest fatality rates, 75% in human, 95% in horses that have not been vaccinated. As all of y'all know, that the bird is really the reservoir of the virus, and the mosquito just is the vector to spread it to both the horses and the humans. Show some of the cases we had in 2009. Again, a cluster in the southeast, like you'd expect. Last year was a little different in that we had this cluster up in Maine. So you don't normally see that in most years, but that's a 2009 spread. Blue tongue, again, blue tongue's spread by culicoides from ruminants. Ruminants have a long-term viremia once they're infected from 45 to 90 days, depending on the species. Isolates that were found at NVSL during 1992 through 2009 shows the states that were positive. These are the serotypes, 11 and 17 being the most prominent. Recent outbreaks with clinical signs of blue tongue in Montana and Wyoming. Sheep, deer, and pronghorn elk were affected, and this was 17 was the serotype. We also find what they call non-endemic blue tongue viruses in the U.S., and this is just a list of the ones that have been found through the various years and their locations. Seems to be a lot in Florida. And since 1999, identified 25 isolates in non-endemic. At least one isolate occurred in each of the 6 southern states. Again, a majority of them occurring in Florida. And of those 10 were previously unrecognized blue tongue serotypes. Blue tongue virus 3 has been the most frequent non-endemic. None of the non-endemic have really caused widespread disease. When combined with endemic strains, 15 blue type serotypes recognized in the U.S. when you add in the non-endemic. And culicoides, of course, is the vector with most associated with Culicoides insignis. The epizootic hemorrhagic disease virus in the U.S., again, this is occurring in deer with spillover into cattle. Identified both at NVSL and the Southeast Cooperative Wildlife Disease Study Group in Georgia. Okay, equine piroplasmosis. Again, etiology agents, Babesia cabali and Taylorella equi, even though there's questions on the equi, is it Taylorella, Babesia, whatever, it may be something else. Clinical signs of acute disease include fever, anemia, icterus. You get a chronic carrier state. This has been a problem because for years we've been using the complement fixation test as the test for letting horses come into the U.S., and we've known that the complement fixation test cannot pick up carriers, or at least it's not that good at picking up carriers. And Don Knowles and his group developed a competitive ELISA that we began using in 2005, and doing comparisons, it appeared that of the horses that we're importing into the U.S., that we may have been missing from 2 to 4% of the actual positives. And those horses had been coming in for various reasons and had not caused any clinical disease or whatever, but were out there. And that's one reason why they did the national prevalence survey last year, where we tested over 15,000. October 2009, there was incidents with Taylorella equi confirmed at NVSL. This came from a large ranch in Texas. I'm sure most of you all are familiar with. But as of February 2002, we had 372 confirmed positive cases, 289 on the Indance Ranch, and others were from horses that had been shipped off of that ranch during the last previous years or on adjacent premises. Those positives were sent to the states you see listed there. There was one positive cohort in Texas. And actually, we've tested over 1,900 horses to date. That's about 2,600 samples because we're doing all those cohort testing twice, and which is very interesting in that the cohorts with the trace outs and whatever, we're not seeing any spread of disease. So it shows that we need that competent vector in order to spread the disease. and it's just not in the other areas. Because of that, they were starting doing, or because of the Texas outbreak and also a more recent outbreak of piroplasmosis in Florida among bush track quarter horse races, the New Mexico Racing Association decided that they would begin testing their horses coming to their quarter horse races. Actually, we've done over 4,600 as of the end of February, found 16 positive. For T. equi. And those are mainly due to management practices, the sharing of needles, the blood doping, and some of the other practices that have been common in more of the bush track areas and not the more sanctioned races. Before we go on to bovine tuberculosis, I will mention one thing about the piroplasmosis. We are looking at treatment methods, trying to figure out, now we have all these positive horses, what we might be able to do to treat them. And immunocarb has been a drug that has been shown to be successful. Don Knowles' group took Babesia cabali and treated some horses with it. We took Babesia equi and treated them, and he was able to clear the cabali quite easily with the immunocarb. Out of 7 of 8 horses that we've treated, we've cleared 7 of 8. At least they went PCR negative, and we're in the process of doing blood transmission studies on those horses. And it looks like they probably would have been cleared also. But what I wanted to mention was that was a study that we used with a naive strain of equi that we got from Peru. They'd never seen immunocarb. We took 2 of those quarter horses out of Florida that were infected with equi and used the same treatment regimen in those horses and didn't even touch them. So it has probably to do with the adaptability of the strains to the various drugs. So you got this situation we have in the U.S. right now where we've got this large 2009 outbreak of horses in Texas that has spread to other states. And on top of that, and completely unrelated to it epidemiologically, you have these horses in the quarter horse racing population. It may be that we'll find we can successfully treat one of them, but not the other. So we'll just have to do additional studies to see how that comes out. Okay, bovine tuberculosis. This graph shows the number of samples that we've had, or positives that we had through the years. Prior to 1998, we did not have the history on the type of herds they came from, whether they were beef or dairy or mixed or cervids. Essentially, we've been getting the last few years 4 to 12 a year as far as new positive herds identified. Looking at the 2000, actually I think I did miss a slide. Confirmed cases from 2009, we had 7 in adult cattle, 7 in feeders, and 2 in captive cervids. A lot of the adult cattle were found at slaughter, and when you do tracebacks, go into Minnesota and find herds. One went back to several times they'll go back into various herds and you test the herd and they'll not be found. And a good example, because these animals move around quite a bit, the Pennsylvania slaughter case, that was at Taylor Pack, which was large slaughter plants for adult cattle in the U.S., went back to an Indiana herd and really could, after investigation, still haven't been able to find anything there. And you see some of the other trace outs. TB's confirmed, and the fed cattle. I also saw one roping steer that was moved back into Florida, and a TB case was detected there, and 2 under investigation in Texas. And then the cervids, we're finding those in captive herds that are being depopulated. Okay, this shows you just the slaughter surveillance from 1998 to 2010. Been a tremendous push to try to increase the number of samples that we're seeing. The UMNR is now pushing for a rate of 1 per 2,000 adult cattle and bison slaughtered, and because we're getting the higher numbers of submissions, we're finding more herds. As far as the histopathological part of the TB program, 10,000 lesions submitted annually off of those lesions from slaughter, tested at NVSL in California Animal Health Labs, Taylorella, and one other, and then the FSIS labs. Of those, you can see the numbers on the numbers of screens as far as animal screen and slides examined in a given year. So we're still got a good active surveillance program. We've also been asked to do a lot of genotyping, both for TB, for Johne's, and for brucellosis. The demand for genotyping has essentially quadrupled in the last couple of years, as more people are wanting to know more of the epidemiology and how these trace back into one areas or the other. We started using variable number tandem repeats for our TB program, and this is just an example on one of the slides. One thing I wanted to point out, we had one positive herd in Indiana that was in cattle, and it looked very similar to other isolates that we had out of cervids in that particular area in the 1990s, and went back and sure enough started checking some of the adjacent captive cervid herds to where that cow was, and found that the actual herd, one of those herds was in fact infected with TB, and so it was depopulated. But it shows you how you can use that as an epidemiological tool. Pseudorabies, we talk about the comprehensive swine surveillance program. This is part of that. 39 pseudorabies labs, part of the Nolan laboratory, and the pilot project that was initiated in November. And this shows the labs that are the normal non-labs, and plus the ones involved in the pilot project. And this is the laboratories, just to show you also the non-labs approved for swine influenza virus, avian influenza. Change the regulations a little bit on influenza, and all H5 and H7s detected in poultry, regardless of pathogenicity, have to be reported. It's because the H5 and the H7, those are the two that can mutate in from the low path into the high path. And so regardless of what it is anymore, they don't make a designation of high path or low path. It's just reportable, whereas the other subtypes, you don't have to worry about it. So it's, detecting a virus-specific RNA or antibodies. Some of the low path AI that we've seen in 2009, and I'm sorry, I don't know what the species were, but these are probably commercial flocks, so they're either chickens or turkeys. But you can see the various states that were involved and the isolates. And also the live bird market system surveillance has been very useful, mainly in the Northeast, New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts area. So New Jersey, the large number of specimens submitted. Wild bird surveillance for the high path AI, H5N1, 903 presumptives of either H5 or H7 sent in. Did real-time PCR specimens, no high path H5N1 detected. We did find the low path, but it was the North American lineage. That's what we normally see as far as the genome in the U.S. and Canada, and the flyway, and some of the states that were isolated from. Swine influenza, acute respiratory disease of swine, type A influenza, characterized by sudden onset, coughing, two forms, epidemic and endemic. See antigenic drift, that the same H and N types in the population will gradually change through mutation. Example of that is the swine Nebraska 92, or you get a antigenic shift where you just get a reassortment, and this is what we've been seeing more lately. Okay, prior to 1998, the H1N1 has been circulating in swine. That's the old Spanish flu that has been around forever. 1998, there was a recombination. We got the H3N2 identified in North Carolina, and that rapidly spread through the swine population. And then also H1N2, which is identified in Indiana. Okay, the 2009 pandemic H1N1, not to be confused with swine flu. As far as the pandemic influenza, mid-February, first case in Mexico. In the United States, April 15th. Most of y'all know the history of this. WHO declared a stage 6 flu pandemic in June. And we've identified it in various species. Some of the work at NVSL, we did some cats and some ferrets and turkeys and a few other things. Shows you just the recombination of the genes that you had. This is the Hong Kong flu, the H3N2. This is the H1N1, the old Spanish flu that had been circulating in swine for years, along with some avian gene pool. There was in 1998, there was this reassortment, which gives you that triple reassortment, which gives you H1N2 and H3N2. Then there's another reassortment bringing in some Eurasian strains of the swine, plus the swine H1N1 to get the pandemic H1N1 that we're seeing now. Okay, as far as reports of the pandemic, turkey breeders thought they had a fowl cholera problem, increased mortality, routine NPIP testing, and then with collection of samples and swabs, found that it was pandemic H1N1 virus was isolated. Similarly, in California and turkeys, where they're showing a drop in egg production. Virus isolation and cell culture made in Darby canine kidney cells, ID by real-time PCR, and for real-time PCR assays developed for the modified matrix and differential matrix as far as the procedures. Those protocols have been distributed to the non-laboratories doing the testing. These are some of the websites that have the information available dealing with the influenza, also NVSL's work and the pandemic work.